Let's bring John McMullen in. Football at 4, 97.3 ESPN. Now, yesterday, John, we joked that we could probably fill the whole hour. Now, today, I mean, we could do shows on what's happening here. All right, the first domino was Josina Anderson reporting that Jalen Mills would be back, and then Garofalo saying it would be as a hybrid safety-type position. And that kind of was like, that's kind of interesting. Well, then the next domino fell almost 5 minutes later, which was, because Malcolm Jenkins is not coming back. So let's start with the Jenkins stuff. How do you read this, that the Eagles and Jenkins decided to part ways? Was this a Jenkins decision? Was this an Eagles decision?
I think it was an Eagles decision, and they want to get younger, obviously, which is understandable. They want to get faster on the back end, and Malcolm is not the fastest safety at this stage of his career. And then they made a very difficult decision and a very questionable decision because this was the leader of not only the defensive unit, the back seven, but also one of the leaders of the locker room. And you can argue the leader of the locker room, unless you want to say it was Jason Peters, who's also gone. So this is a pretty big deal that the Eagles are moving on from these two particular players. And I just tweeted out a little while ago, you go back to January when Howie Roseman admitted he got a little too attached to his players, and that needed to change a little bit. Well, these are seismic shifts. These are not changes. I mean, to send that message with these two particular players, and obviously most notably Malcolm today, that's big. And I also tweeted how tough an industry this is, because everything that made Malcolm Jenkins great, never missed a practice, never mind a play, never mind a game or a play, even worked on special teams when they needed him there, and was out there almost 100% of the time for his entire Eagles career. And what does that say? It says, in the rearview mirror, you say thank you, but you look ahead and you say, boy, he's 32 years old.
Yeah.
It's not going to get any better. There's a lot of tread off that tire, and that's what happens.
So
it's tough.
The rub here is they were kind of stuck in the middle. They got a 32-year-old guy. The rub's off you just said the wear's off the tires here, but he's also such a hard guy to replace. So I don't know what the right answer is here. Like, did they make the right decision? Did they put their big boy pants on and say, look, we know how important he is, but we just can't do it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I thought they needed him because of the change that's going to go on elsewhere. You mentioned Jalen Mills. He'll be back now, but he's going to move to safety. So you need two new starting corners. You're going to have essentially two new starting safeties unless they bring back Rodney McLeod. And I don't know if you want to do that. So there could be four new starters in the secondary. That's a lot of change in one off season. And you don't have that steady presence now, the leader. And I thought, hey, you can change three as long as you have Malcolm back there to get everybody on the right page, to make everybody line up correctly, put everybody in the right spots. Now you're not going to have that. And also, from Jim Schwartz's perspective, he no longer has the most versatile piece on the chessboard that he's had, and a guy who's played 7 different positions. There's nobody else they're going to get that can play 7 different positions. So that's one side of it. The other side is this is one of the slowest teams in football. And usually people talk about it, Mike, ad nauseum about the receiver position, but it's all over. They need to get faster at the positions you need to have speed at. So they may have made the right decision. Only time will tell. But, man, it's a difficult one, and it's one that surprised me a little bit.
You mentioned Jim Schwartz, and it's funny, I was going to head in that direction. When they sat down and processed this, Howie, Doug, and Jim, do you think that he was accepting of this? Like he realized, okay, you know what, I can do without him, I'm okay? Or do you think he fought for Malcolm Jenkins to come back?
It's tough to say. I mean, Jim is an old school guy. I often point out that he started his NFL career under Bill Belichick. He has a lot of those same sentiments, same mentality, and look who Bill Belichick is going from. So, you know, he's a tough guy, and he's not going to say, "Oh, thanks. Look back 3 years, what you did for me." He's the kind of guy who's going to look forward and say, "Can you still do it for me?" So I think, you know, the fact that the Eagles moved on from Malcolm Jenkins is probably a clear indication that Jim was okay with it, because he's got a big say on what happens on the defensive side of the football.
Now, looking at Devin McCourty's contract and trying to think about what Malcolm Jenkins was realistically asking for, and then you can even look further into what they signed Hargrave for, can you think about maybe did they choose Hargrave over Malcolm Jenkins with that money and that annual amount of money?
No, I don't think that had to do. That had more to do with Byron Jones. I think the Hargrave side. If the Eagles got Byron Jones, I don't think Hargrave would be here. So I think it had more to do with that than Malcolm Jenkins. Obviously, you budget certain numbers for certain positions, and the smart teams tend to be the disciplined teams, and they don't go above what they budget for. Traditionally, the Eagles haven't paid a ton towards safeties. Malcolm would be the measuring stick. So obviously they didn't want to go above that at 32 years old. We'll see if they do anything in free agency. I certainly think they're going to sign another safety in free agency. I'm not sure if it's going to be at that level. It's certainly not going to be at the top level, guys who got franchised like Justin Simmons, Anthony Harris. It's not going to be at that level. And I just don't think they feel that way. On the other hand, they like to build on up front, on the lines, offensive line, defensive line. And when they didn't get the guy they wanted, they kind of defaulted to that. Well, what do? We build on the defensive line. Now, the problem is now you have Malik Jackson gets paid $10 million a year. He's going to be a rotational player. So there are more dominoes to fall. And if you look at the Eagles today and say, what the heck is the plan? I can't tell you. But we're still early in this process, and obviously everybody's impatient. But I'm with everybody else. I have no idea what this plan is, because it doesn't make a lot of sense right now.
John McMullen, Football at 4, at JF McMullen. A lot of Eagles, a lot of stuff. So Jenkins is out. Now, the big loss, too, is forget what he does on the field. You can make an argument that these last 3 seasons have only been salvaged. The Super Bowl one, forget that. He was obviously a huge part of that. But the last 2 seasons that seemed like they were off the rails are only salvaged because of his voice in that locker room. And you wonder, how do they recover from losing that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a lot of leadership. And I put Jason in that category as well, because he might have been, I call him the godfather of the Eagles locker room. Malcolm was more visible, more vocal. And as I said, you could argue those are the 2 biggest leaders this team had. And certainly from a player perspective. Yeah. You already saw Rasul Douglas out there texting, tweeting about Malcolm Jenkins, WTF. Mm-hmm. So, this is something, you think about it, and fans, and I understand, they don't think about that kind of stuff. They think about in more of a fantasy environment, more of, oh, get me this player, get me this player, get me this player. And they don't think about the human part of it. Understandably so. Well, part of the human part of it is most of the people in that locker room have tremendous respect for Malcolm Jenkins, so you got to deal with that fallout as well, and that's part of this decision as well. The Eagles know that.
Mills. 1 year, $5 million, hybrid. I mean, is that essentially saying that he is going to be their Malcolm Jenkins this year?
No, I don't think you can expect that of a guy who's never played the position before. And not only the contract tells you a lot, it tells you, number one, there was no market for Jalen Mills, which is certainly a little disappointing, I would think, from his perspective and Drew Rosenhaus's perspective, who was his agent. So to say he's going to come back and play safety, a position he's never played before, and be able to move around the chessboard, as I said, like Malcolm Jenkins. Well, if that's your plan stinks. I mean, that's not only unfair of Jalen Mills, that's just dumb to expect that. So I hope that's not the Eagles' expectation.
Yeah, it's funny when it first happened. It was weird because Mills, that news came out first, and it said this hybrid position was what they kind of agreed to. And, Hunter and I are going back and forth. Well, I mean, I can't see them letting Jenkins go and letting Mills move into that spot. But, now you're seeing that you think Mills and Rodney McLeod, do they bring McLeod back now?
Well, potentially now you have some space, and I don't think Rodney's going to get a ton of money because of his age and his injury history. But if the Eagles were to bring Rodney back, I think that would be Plan C or Plan D. I don't think that would be what they have in mind or what they want to accomplish. But as we saw with Byron Jones, sometimes you don't get what you want, and you have to go to turn the page and go to lesser decisions. So if they picked up Malcolm's option, yeah, I mean, Rodney wouldn't have been back 100%. I still think it's unlikely, but there's at least a possibility, especially as the market starts to close down in the numbers and as everyone signs. I mean, that's how free agency works. You have that second wave, and you tend to get bargains in that second wave.
You mentioned Byron Jones, and it did seem like that was Howie's first target, and that was his mindset going into free agency. That he didn't get him, and that's obvious at this point. What do you think they do at that position? You saw other guys go. You saw Fuller go to the Redskins, and you saw some other moves. Is Slay their best option at that point if they can go out and make a trade with the Lions?
Potentially, or Trufant, because Marquand Manuel's here.
Xavier Rhodes is also a name out there?
Yeah, you don't want Xavier
I know.
Rhodes,
I agree with you completely.
You don't want Trey Waynes either. I mean, I just talked about smart teams, and they tend to be disciplined. And the Eagles identified the corner they want, and they tried to get Byron Jones. But it went past a number they wanted to go to. And forget about the annual value. It was more about the guaranteed money. And I've talked a lot about this with Mike. I think the Eagles lucked out. I really do. Because I think if he comes here as the highest paid corner in the history of football, I think the expectations would have been off the charts. I think he would have failed spectacularly, and I think he would have been out of here in year 3. And that's what the Eagles sort of wanted to do as a safety net. They wanted to be able to get out of the contract in year 3. And once the numbers got past that, they just begged off. But they wanted him, not trying to cushion the blow. That's the player they wanted. That's the player they identified. And now you have to go to those plan Bs and plan Cs. And I imagine Slay and Trufant will be talked about. The problem with Slay is obviously you have to trade. You have to give up assets to get him. Hey, you got to cobble it together. They're going to draft a corner, I think now. Maybe not in the first round, but certainly in the premium picks. And they got to bring bodies in and hey, maybe start developing guys. We've talked a lot about Jeffrey Lurie demanding essentially that Doug Peterson bring in outside eyes to look at this offense and bring in new ideas. Well, you just saw Marquand Manuel. That's new eyes on young players. And he has a history, for instance, of taking corners and turning them into safeties. We've already seen it now. That's what their plan is with Jalen Mills. So maybe the new eyes of a new defensive backs coach, who knows? Maybe Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas start going in the right direction. They're still young players. I know that's not going to excite people, but overpaying, it might be a better way to go than overpaying mediocre cornerbacks like Trey Waynes.
Okay, let's real quick because we're looking at the clock and saying, holy mackerel, things are flying. This Jenkins stuff, Mills is back. Jordan Howard, it didn't seem that he was going to be part of their plans, but he's going to Miami. Now, real quick, I guess Howard leaving, they only have 2 running backs that I can think of right now with Clement gone, Sproles out, and Howard gone. They're down to what? Just Sanders and Boston Scott. So you would think that running back's now another area where they're going to need to either look in free agency and or later rounds of the draft. But what about a safety option in first round now in the draft?
Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, they have so many needs. They still obviously need receiver, and they still need corner. And just from the Eagles' perspective, they haven't valued safeties to the point where they're going to take them in the first round. So we still have a lot of dominoes to shake out in free agency, and you'll get a better indication. I still think wide receiver would be a heavy likelihood in round 1, followed by corner. And then even that, I mean, what this team does, and that's what happened with Hargrave, if they don't get what they want, they default to, well, let's get a lineman, because that's how you're good in this league, if you're good up front. And as I said, they now have 3 defensive tackles who make 8 figures, and Fletcher Cox, Malik Jackson, and now Hargrave. So they value those guys, and that's sort of their default setting. I don't think that's a bad default setting, by the way. Because if you're good on the offensive line, you're good on the defensive line, you can kind of figure out the rest as long as you have a quarterback. And obviously they have a quarterback.
Yeah. I do want to get to you just mentioned Hargrave, because I think he's a pretty good player. I think the Pittsburgh people probably would be saying, man, we shouldn't have let him out of here. So that adds to we talked yesterday. Do you think defensive tackle is a place that they might put a little bit more emphasis on? Well, shortly after they signed him, and I really think that was a sneaky good move.
Yeah, he's a good player. But I talk about the plan. I don't. Remember when this team signed Malik Jackson last year, brought him in, what did they say? They said, well, we need that interior push next to Fletcher Cox on the pass rush. And this is one of the best interior pass rushers. Now we fast forward essentially 365 days, and you're bringing a nose tackle in who is a better pass rusher than people give him credit for. But still, he's not regarded as a Fletcher Cox type or a Malik Jackson type when it comes to the interior pass rush. That's not the strength of his game. So I question the plan, but at the end, you're talking about a really good player. And if you get really good players, nothing bad is going to happen. You just have to figure out the fit. Where's Malik Jackson? You can't move on. You can't cut him. Too much dead money. We've talked about that. Are you going to kick him outside? He hates playing defensive end. He's told me that personally. He hates it, even though he's 6'5". It doesn't make sense to me. He likes to be inside. And if you're going to rotate him and say, I talk about the fantasy football aspect again, that's great. But somebody's going to be unhappy not being on the field. And you really want to have a rotational defensive tackle, a backup defensive tackle, making $10 million a year?
Yeah.
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
It was kind of like I was surprised that they were like, let's invest more into this spot with Jackson. I guess Jernigan's going to be gone. You wrote yesterday about Ridgeway coming back, and we talked about that a little bit. They got a lot of weird decisions, and they lose Camus today as well, so they need another linebacker. They already released Nigel, so that's another position they got to find some bodies for.
Yeah, I think they were hoping that market would come down. And I look at guys like Blake Martinez and the kid from Cleveland, Joe Schobert, and they were hoping to get $10 million a year. I think the Eagles were hoping that would not happen, but it did come to fruition. They did get that kind of money. They have so many needs. It's kind of amazing because we talked about this organization as so deep and so talented really just over a year ago. And now we look at it and say, man, they need everything. They need corners, safety, linebackers. You could argue they need an edge rusher. They need 75 receivers. The only thing they don't need, they still need a backup quarterback, even though they re-signed Nate Sudfeld. The only thing they really don't need is a starting offensive lineman. But even that, they need depth now because they lost Halapoulivaati Vaitai. They need a lot.
Yeah, well, you just brought the Vaitai. I want to get your thoughts. 5 years, $50 million. I know we thought he was going to get paid, but did he get paid even more than you thought?
A little bit. I'll tell you, you look at that first day, Big V got the third biggest contract in free agency. Is that amazing? Unbelievable. And everybody here thought he stunk. And I don't know how many times I said on this show, Mike, you can attest to it. This is an offensive line deficient league, and this guy is going to get paid. I didn't know if it was going to be 8. I thought more in the range of 8, 9. He got 10 in 5 years, more than that, because most of the contracts yesterday were 3 years. Everything's trending downward. Only Byron Jones V, and I forget the third. He had the third most valued contract signed on the first day of free agency. Not signed, but agreed to. That's pretty amazing.
There's a lot of Eagles fans upset with Howie Roseman right now for not getting DeAndre Hopkins, which I think is kind of funny because to me it seems like Bill O'Brien didn't even take calls or assess that situation properly as a whole to get rid of DeAndre Hopkins for a pick and David Johnson, which is ridiculous. What are your thoughts on DeAndre Hopkins going to Arizona?
Yeah, well, like most people, I thought it was an awful trade from Houston's perspective. But, he just didn't get along with the head coach and vice versa. So I talked a little bit about that with Mike yesterday, and I said, when I talk about Doug Peterson and people ask me what makes him a good coach, and I never talk about X's and O's because that's secondary. What makes him a good coach is managing personalities, keeping everybody on the same page. Everybody wants to play for Doug Peterson. He's one of those guys. Everybody wants to be in that locker room, wants to fight for him. That's not the case with a lot of coaches in this league. And when you have a player with the talent of DeAndre Hopkins, man, you better work it out. And Bill O'Brien, he's not a bad coach. He's not a bad game day coach. And I know Josh asked me that question yesterday. Who's the worst GM, Chip Kelly or Bill O'Brien? I said, Bill's probably worse than Chip as a general manager, but he's a better coach. He should give up the GM part of it.
All right, there's so much. By the way, Rivers, $25 million. He's going to the Colts. Tom Brady, we never even got into this because of all the Eagles news, but Brady is not going back to New England, John. I don't know if stunning but the biggest thing is now what? There's some reports that he's going to sign with Tampa this week. I know we've been back and forth on this a lot, but it's now real. He's not going to be a Patriot.
Yeah, it is shocking to me. I said along, I thought it would be the Patriots. If not the Patriots, it would be the Chargers for reasons outside of football. Look, Bruce Arians is one of those guys. He's done it in the past with Carson Palmer, had success with an aging quarterback. I think everybody points to Peyton Manning in Denver. as signing a quarterback late who can get you over the top. But, A, I don't think Tampa Bay is that close. And, B, Tom's 43 years old. I've said this time that this is going to be ugly. This is not going to end well. I wish, to be honest, I think he should have retired as a Patriot. But, I mean, what finds Tom Brady more than anything else is 199, and that's where he was drafted, and that's where the chip on his shoulder came from, and that's where the competitiveness comes from. And you're looking at a guy who's 43 years old who thinks he can turn around the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I wish him luck,
well,
but
not only
I
that,
think it's going to be ugly.
So the next domino is you got Bridgewater. Looks like he's going to Carolina, which means Carolina's going to trade Cam Newton. Jameis Winston's now got to find a new place to go. So everything seems to be going crazy now based off a couple of moves because Brady's out. New England's going to need a quarterback. I mean, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, and you're right. Phillip Rivers, not as old, but he's starting in a new situation with an organization that thinks they're close. I don't think that's going to end up well. People are connecting the dots with Andy Dalton in New England. Jameis Winston's the one guy I can't figure out a spot for him. And the most interesting thing about this quarterback musical chairs is usually there's not enough quarterbacks to fill all the chairs. And now this year, such a weird year, there's too many quarterbacks and not enough spots. It almost never happens in this league.
Yeah, and by the way, Marcus Mariota, he signs to be a backup in Vegas. So, you got that move you just mentioned. Oh, Nate Sudfeld, by the way, is back. And I find that to be an interesting story here locally, too, because does that mean the Eagles essentially said, we can't even afford to bring in a bigger name backup or a more serviceable backup, so we're going to go to Sudfeld because of our budget constraints?
Yeah, I don't know. They don't have budget. They have plenty of money to bring in a veteran quarterback. I think it might be an indication that when Josh McCown is healthy, he might be back again.
Ah, there you go.
And Nate, Nate gets along with Carson Wentz. That's part of the job description in this town. And they are really close. But Doug has said time and time again, and more than saying it, he's actually verbalized it, but more than saying it, he just wants a veteran and backup quarterback. That's his belief. Right. That's his feeling. You need extensive playing time, and that's why he moved away from Nate last year. So I think Nate's going to be the third-string quarterback again.
All right. The Eagles, this just in Ian Rappaport, the Eagles are signing Rodney McLeod, giving them back-end health on the same day they moved on from Malcolm Jenkins. Does McLeod's role expand? I mean, I'm not saying he played poorly. You just never hear his name. Is that one of those good things that if he's not here,
they're different players. I mean, Malcolm was the box safety and Rodney was the center fielder. And again, I go back, and this is the third time I've said it in this conversation. I don't get this plan. This team needs to get faster on the back end. So from that perspective, if you want to argue that point, makes some sense why you want to move on from Malcolm Jenkins. However, Rodney McLeod is not the quickest center fielder any longer in this league, so you still have that dearth of speed. And then we circle back to that Jalen Mills conversation. Do they really believe he can replace Malcolm Jenkins? Because I hope that is not their belief. A, that's not fair to Jalen, and B, it's just that's a bad decision if that's the decision.
Yeah. I feel, though, that Mills, we've been hearing it for years, John, that's a guy that Schwartz trusts, and I feel like Schwartz is saying to him, Jalen, I need you to be the guy to pick up this role.
Well, he definitely trusts him, and he trusted him more than any other corner, but he was speed deficient. I mean, Jim understood that. It was just he didn't feel he had better options. All of a sudden, you move him back to safety. Safeties don't have to be as fast as outside corners. But I mean, it's fair to question these moves. I wouldn't criticize anyone who does that.
All right. Well, we got a lot. Of course, things are happening. And, oh, by the way, free agency opens tomorrow.
Yeah, hasn't even opened.
Has not opened. Camus Grugier-Hill, by the way, he has signed with the Dolphins as well. The Dolphins, are they the new Redskins, or are they the Browns?
Yeah, they're the off-season winners. No surprise. I mean, they had about $90 million in cap space. So a lot of it is they have to spend a certain amount of money. So they had tanked on purpose last year.
Yeah, Sam Hinkie doesn't approve of this tank. It was only 1 year.
Yeah, probably right. And look, they got a lot of good players on paper, but we always talk about off-season winners, and they rarely are the regular season winners. And the smart teams in this league, as I said, are the ones that are disciplined and the ones that don't overpay and the ones a lot of times that aren't splashy. And we'll revisit this. Hopefully we're all here. Hopefully we're all talking about football in 2 years, and you're going to see a lot of these big-name guys, as you see everywhere, in that third year get cut if they don't live up to expectations.
All right, Football at 4, John McMullen at JF McMullen. Give him a follow there for all the Eagles and NFL stuff. And, of course, 97.3 ESPN.com updating you on all the Eagles moves, as there's a ton. And we will continue talking about them here on the Sports Bash today. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Yeah, man. John's back tomorrow with another edition of Football at 4.